And we read a textbook that was a very unusual textbook for its time because it wasn't set up in a nonfiction format. It was a story about a family that was moving to and exploring the American West. And so I got to know the characters in the family, and they all had their quirks, and I got to root for them, and I learned about messes and the gold rush and the entire history of the region. But it was done in a fictionalized way that kept me and the other students waiting to find out what was going to happen next to that family. And so what I'd like to explore today is ways that we can help to recreate that experience of excitement, help our students make STEAM connections by exploring real-world settings of fictional books. And as y'all folks who know me know, I'm very passionate about nature. So let me ask you this. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think is the highest level of stress that either you or your students have felt in the past year? 1 to 10, you can hold up. Yeah, I mean, definitely I've had a 10. Yeah, other 10s? So it's been a rough year. So why not go on a virtual vacation to go explore the real world setting of what fictional book you're studying? And as a bonus, there are STEAM components, and we're going to talk in detail about those STEAM components. Now, the slides are a little dense, so it's being recorded. And if you email me, I'll also be happy to email you the slides so that you don't have to get everything down. The sign-up sheet is getting passed around, and I'll also mention I have handouts here, and I hope that you'll take advantage of those as well, because there's lots of free resources and also ideas to get you started. So we all know intuitively how students, and we all, respond to stories, but as you know, students are more engaged if they can make text to real-world connections of the books that they're studying. And if you'd like to get started with your students, a great way is just dive in and investigate the setting. So if the book is set in the natural world, there are lots of things that you can do, but even if it's set in an urban setting or a small town setting, you can explore a lot of the economy, the geography, this government, the cultural norms, the artistic world, if it the science, the technology, and the engineering that make that world go around. And if you'd like to get out in nature, consider a book set in the natural world. And I'd like to say just a minute, about the importance of books set in nature, particularly for students from historically marginalized communities. As you all have probably seen the study that shows that students from historically marginalized communities are less likely in where they live to have access to green space. And they're even less likely to have access to green space that their families consider safe. And so they're less likely to be able to get out in that green space. So if we can both teach them STEAM subjects and let them take a virtual vacation by just exploring the natural world, in my mind, that's double duty. So if you're looking for books set in the natural world, here are some of my favorites. Shameless plug for smack dab in the middle of maybe. But whatever your setting is, I invite you to get dirty and dig in, roll up your sleeves, and ask yourself some questions. So where in the world is the story set? Where's the main character existing within that world? Is the main character traveling? If the main character's traveling, how are they getting there? Invite students to learn about the form of transportation. And we're just focusing on transportation, there's tons of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematical aspects that students can dig in just on that one aspect. But don't stop there, because you can also explore the geography of the area. We in South Carolina are really lucky, just even within our state. You know, we have mountains and we have the seas, we have flat, we have hills. So ask your students to dig in and learn about the ecosystem of the area. Is it a rainforest or is it tropical or Arctic? And what continent and growing zone is it? And the geography is going to shape so much of it. It's going to shape the food that's grown there. It's going to shape the culture that's created around the food. And we in South Carolina know very much the connection between food and culture and how traditions are grown up around the food and the culture. And that provides an opportunity to really dig into some of the technological aspects of the harvesting of whatever crop is grown in that area. And students can do diagrams, they can investigate one particular technology that makes the food accessible, or things that they'd like to see to make this, this fictional world a bit better. You can also look at the history of the setting. Again, we in South Carolina are really, really lucky to have enormous Revolutionary War and other history. So, is there a conflict that's taken place in that area? And as we know, conflicts tend to reverberate and continue through history and affect us today. Has the area ever been occupied by an outside force? I mean, think about a story that's set in Ukraine. That world is going to be impacted for generations to come by what's going on now in that setting. Has the setting been the same for generations, or is it in a period of rapid change? If it's a period of rapid change, what is the protagonist's role in either making that change, reacting to the change, or working to change the trajectory of the change that's happening? You might also ask about the economy as you investigate setting. And so you might invite your students to think about what jobs are available. Are some jobs more prestigious than others? They can really dive into the culture. What's the training for those jobs required? Is the area rich or is it poor? Is there a class system? Where does the main character fit inside that system? Is there a large wealth gap between the haves and the have-nots? And how does that impact the governmental structure? Does the community trade with other communities? What is considered valuable? And if you think about, in South Carolina history, at one time, buckskins where the phrase "a dollar for a buck," came from, were really valuable and used for a trading commodity. Today it's dollars, but invite your students to just get curious and ask questions about that setting and see why what is being done in that setting is being done, and they can make connections to their own world. So we talked about economy. Another thing that they can investigate is how is the society governed? Who is in charge and why are they in charge? And in the US, we've seen lots of swings, and certainly we've seen that in South Carolina. Do the common people have a voice in what's done? That has certainly changed in South Carolina as we have become more democratic. Does the party in power run for re-election? Are there term limits? How are taxes allocated? Is the government perceived as respectable or corrupt? How are crimes investigated and how are they punished? And how do the common people feel about it? Invite the students to, again, just get curious and ask some questions. You might also investigate the setting and invite your students to really consider the impact of where the main character lives and how that affects the choices that are available to that main character, and also their place in the world and how they feel about it. And just investigating the main character's dwelling place can be a unit in and of itself. So you might ask, not only what is the character's home like, but what is it like in relationship to other people's homes in that area? Because that's going to impact a lot of how the character sees themselves in the world. Does the character see themselves as staying in that community, staying in that environment, or do they have upward trajectory ambitions? Do they see themselves doing something else that might be considered of a lower status in that community? And then, again, in South Carolina, we have a lot of urban places, and then we have a lot of rural areas. So thinking about how the character is growing up provides a lot of opportunities to investigate STEAM elements in whatever that area is. Now, I grew up in on 200 acres. So my experience with technology, art, science, and engineering is likely to be very different than someone who grew up in an urban area. And those differences are things that your students can enjoy. Another thing that they can investigate is the culture of the setting of the fictional world. Every society has its traditions, and they have traditions partly because of history, partly because of food, but also just because of the way that the weather impacts what's going on. You know, we have Christmas and Hanukkah and other holidays in the wintertime when people are looking for opportunities to come inside and gather together. You know, 4th of July, you know, is set in the winter. So in the summer. So invite your students to ask questions about why what is being done in the community is being done, and what are the traditions and what are the unwritten rules, and invite them to perhaps look at exploring unwritten rules in the fictional world. And is anybody an outcast? And if somebody's an outcast, why? Setting can also be used as character, and I think the best books really do that very effectively. I know that when I was writing Smack Dab, I really tried to make the setting of a southern ghost town be such a strong force that it acted almost as a character itself. And so your students can dive into literary analysis by exploring the setting of the book and how it changes the main character, how it forces them to make decisions that perhaps they didn't want to make, and how that changes the trajectory of the character's decisions in the future. And settings are not constant. As we talked about, settings change. So your students can explore how the main character is impacting the setting, just as the setting is impacting the main character. And you may want, at the beginning of the unit, when you all are introducing a new book, to do what I call setting bingo. So we talked about some of the many variables that are present in a setting, you know, urban, rural, very class-based system versus more open and democratic. Add the agriculture, the technology that's used, engineering principles, artistic and other, and you might invite your students to, but judge the book by the cover, look at the cover, read the inside flaps, and then make predictions about what they're going to find among those elements in the story itself. And then the students, with a list of words, create their own bingo sheets. So they use predictive analysis, and then the first person to, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally wins. And it's a great way to get your students really excited about exploring and making predictions about the setting. Another way to really engage your students from a STEAM perspective in the setting is to get them to look at the setting with fresh eyes. So imagine that they're visiting from another planet. What if they were visiting Columbia, South Carolina as an alien? What if they were visiting this conference and had to report back? What would they report back about the way that our group governs itself? What would they report back about the people they meet? What would they report back about the science, the technology, the engineering, the artistic, and the technological things that they find when they get here? And what would they consider important and what would they not? And part of that would depend on where they're coming from. And so your students can create a whole backstory there. So another thing that you might consider doing with your students, just to get them, again, immersed in the setting of the book that you're studying, but also really developing their writing skills further, is to invite them to write an essay about how they would feel living in that setting and why. How would their life change? Would it be for the better or for the worse? And is there anything within STEAM subjects that could make life within that society better, not only for your students, but also for everyone. You might also invite students to create a map of the world or the main character and annotate with each fact that affects character decisions or the ultimate story arc. And if you're looking for an example of an interactive map, you can find one on my website. Another thing that you might do is invite your students to take nature journaling to the next level. By inviting students to create a nature or just like a diary type journal from the point of view of the main character in the story. And ask them to consider the character's story goals, because what a character in the middle of getting chased by bad guys versus a character who's sitting out to write a poem, they're going to have very different observations and consider things very, very different in terms of importance. And so, that it allows your students to really dig down deep. Another thing that they might want to do is, as they think about the community and the culture and the way that it governs itself, is to think about creating a community calendar for the place where the story's set. What would the community decide to honor? Who would decide what events to celebrate? And how does everyone else feel about it? You can think about the Hunger Games. It certainly had one big event on the community calendar, but people had very differing feelings depending on which unit they were in. I forget the word from the Hunger Games, but the district, thank you. Which district? The people in District 1 felt very, very differently than the people in the outlying districts. Another thing that you can do is to invite students to create newspaper articles, again, exercising their writing skills, reporting events in the book as they happen within that setting. You can create opportunities for students to expand not only their artistic abilities and go into artwork, but also more critical thinking about symbols, not only within the fictional world, but within their own society, by asking them to create currency for the world that they're studying. What symbol, just think about our dollar bills, our money, all the many, many symbols that are in our money. Why were they selected? And what role do they serve today? And what values do they reinforce? And how has the reaction to those values changed over time? And bless you, and that's something that your students can do as well. Your students might also want to imagine a fictional museum within the real world setting that they're studying. And students can be as creative as they want. What I love about whenever I travel around the world is visiting museums, is it provides a great insight into what it is that a culture really values and celebrates. And I'll never forget being in a museum just outside Tokyo and seeing a display celebrating the potato starch bombs that had successfully blown up on the U.S. West Coast. And just thinking, and thinking about how our museums, similarly celebrate military victories against other countries, but I'd never looked at it, from the point of view of the other country. And so your students might think about what artwork would be there and what historical elements would be there. And that provides, what I love about this activity is, as you know, your students have different strengths and different things that they feel comfortable with. So by offering them perhaps a menu of options, students who are really drawn to the museum project can choose it, whereas other students can choose some of the other options. You might also invite your students to go deeper into the dwelling place. And we talked a little bit about that of the characters by creating a model of the main character's home with footnotes about how every single element affected both the character and the story arc. And as a writer, I will tell you, that nothing in the setting of any book that you read is there by accident. It always serves a purpose, and the author always had something in mind by putting in that detail, even if the detail is not revealed. So by inviting your students to do that, you can kind of get them to put on their writer hat and come up with some really creative ideas about how that might be impacting the story. You can also invite students to get even deeper into STEAM by coming up with an invention. So that requires them to first come up with the story goals, the character goal that the character is motivated by, reading the book, seeing how they accomplish that, but then stepping back and asking, is there a scientific, is there a technological, is there an engineering, is there an artistic, or is there a mathematical principle or an invention using one of those principles that would kind of be a shortcut to help the character achieve their story goal? And if so, that's a great way for them to roll up their sleeves again and dig more deeply into whatever subject that they chose. You can also invite students to create a data log of the information, particularly STEAM information, that the main character either knows or needs to know at different parts of the story. So I'm sure you all have read Hatchet. So do y'all remember the moose scene? You know, where the moose attacks the main character? I did not know before I read the book that moose attacked, that were territorial and could attack, but that's definitely something that the main character needs to know. And similarly, your students can go through and collect a log of that information as well. You can also make it fun and send them on a guided scavenger hunt. If the story is set outside, y'all know I love nature, and this scavenger hunt you can download for free on my website. You can also, whatever book you're reading, I'm sure you can find items that you can use to put in your own scavenger hunt to create one. You can also ask students to examine and then to report back to class in whatever form they'd like to do, whether it's a blog, whether it's a podcast, a newspaper article, an essay, an artistic work. The sky is the limit on one of the principles, one of the STEAM principles at work in the book that they're reading. And just a few examples, like photosynthesis. If elevators play a big part in it, all the way down, how elevators work, or the engineering principles that allow a bird to fly or a nest to survive through the snow and ice of a South Carolina winter. You might also consider a different kind of scavenger hunt. And that's where, if you're looking to get your students reading, say, one particular shelf of books that you know they will love, but they haven't really embraced yet, you can curate a shelf on your library card or on your bookshelf and invite them to do a scavenger hunt within your own environment and find at least one item that's mentioned in the setting of the book. And because you all are so smart and have chosen books that they really should read but haven't read yet, my bet is that they won't be able to stop once they find just that one thing in the scavenger hunt. They'll then be sucked in and they'll read the wonderful book that you knew that they would love all along. And then if you'd like to engage your students even more fully in exploring the natural world, you can find lots of cricket challenges on my website, and the website of just about any author whose book is set outdoors is going to have most likely some outdoor activities. One of the activities that is my favorite activity of all is to create a discovery center. And you can do that in your library, or your students can do that at home. And the students just go out, they gather things that they found. This is something I bought. I bought a printer's tray for $10 at a yard sale, went out, spent an afternoon gathering stuff, stuck it in, and then once you have a discovery center, and it can be as simple as a basket or a tray or a shoebox, it doesn't have to be a printer's tray, then you can have a nature wonder hour. And that's where students are invited to really dig in and ask questions about the history and the STEAM elements of every single natural element that they found. And there's a handout up here with lots of those questions that you can ask, and you can also find that on the site. You might also consider using nature-based writing prompts. So if your students are stressed out and you have a nice, safe outdoor space within your school grounds, ask them just to spend 5 minutes, either on your school grounds or at the end of the day, exploring what they experience through the natural world through each of their senses, what they see, hear, taste, touch, and feel. And it's amazing in the educators that I've talked to who've done this, just the difference after just 5 minutes of spending time outdoors. And you can find also for free a guided meditation. If you're looking for other ideas, Outdoorosity, as Brenda mentioned, is a free resource with activities. And I promised you a bounty of other activities, and I'll tell you about those briefly, and then I want to hear questions from you all. So one of the things that you can find, as Brenda mentioned, I am a first-generation college graduate, so I am on a mission to try and help other students make the transition that I've had. So we developed a completely free Building Grit Kit, and you can find that free on my website. It uses nature as a fiction as a jumping off point to help students set their own goals, establish a vision board, identify obstacles to their goals, navigate around them, and recruit a team of mentors to help them do it. It does use Smack Dab, but you can use it with any book that you're reading, as long as the main character is growing and changing, which is basically the ingredient for any well-written piece of fiction. So there's one kit for young readers, and then there's one for high school students, and it does a similar thing, but at a more advanced level. So as Brenda mentioned, I do have 2 grant opportunities available. One is for a mentored implementation of the Building Grit Kit, and then the other is in the project that I'm collaborating with Sam Houston State University on. And so I was presenting actually in Columbia this past summer, and Brenda, you were there, on using nature in school environments. And as I was driving back, I was thinking, why has no one done a study to measure the impact of nature interventions on perhaps the most stressful measure of student performance, which is standardized test? And I connected with another attendee who's a really well-established researcher at Sam Houston State University, and so we decided to do it. And it's completely free. Schools can choose from 1 or up to 4 nature interventions, and one of them is as simple as going for a walk outside 15 minutes, walk within 30 minutes of test administration. And so we'll compare the results of students who have done at least one of the interventions with control groups of students who haven't. So there's stuff there, information about it, and information to sign up for it as well. Some other free things that you can find, and these are the ones that are on my website. No matter what book you're reading, you're most likely going to find similar resources on the author website. So some of the things that you can find online are an educator's guide, over 30 lesson plans, an activity guide, including a draw your own currency activity, book trailer, an interactive link to the real places that are included in Smack Dab, the Building Grit Kit that we talked about, and then this is my favorite tool. If you're working with students in a lot of writing projects, this may look like an ordinary bookmark, but if you turn it on its side, it becomes what I think is one of the most powerful revision tools that I've ever used. I'm also a securities lawyer, and I started reviewing documents using a straight edge ruler, because if you're doing, a contract or a securities offering, if you get a comma or a zero in the wrong place, it's a big deal. So I'd go line by line by line down the page. And when I became an author, I thought, well, how can I make that accessible and fun for students and educators? And also, how can I equip students to take ownership of their own revision process so that they don't do their first draft, say, oh, I'm done, turn it in, and then get discouraged when they get back a paper full of marks and comments. So instead of that model, how about if students were empowered to give themselves permission to write a rough draft and then go line by line, review it, and then ask themselves the questions in the bookmark to become active parts of the revision process and to envision revision as part of the writing process. So there's one side for creative writing, and then you just flip it over for academic essays. And the students who've used it have all taken their papers from like this level to this level. So it's been really fun to see that process, and I always love to do book workshops with students. You can also find a hidden object search. This past year we did, in addition to book club questions and a book club menu, a book club playlist featuring all Southern artists. So had a lot of fun getting to play music critic. So if you want to look at some examples of that and you'd like to try that with your students, I'm happy to share everything I learned the hard way. There's also cricket challenges to get students outside. Bookmarks, and I've got free bookmarks here for you all today. And then finally, an interactive clue trail that students who've read it can answer a series of 3 riddles. Each riddle reveals a hidden painting with hidden writing. And if they can, if they've read it, they will know how to decode the hidden writing, and they can print out a Clue Solver's badge. So I hope that you all can tell that I am passionate about supporting the work of educators, and particularly South Carolina educators. So I'm always on the lookout for new resources that we can develop. If you have ideas for things you'd like to see, just email me. And I announce those on social media, so if you'd like to follow me, I've listed my social media tags. Feel free. And then I will be around during the conference. I am signing to, well, be sure and get our book swag. And then I'm signing today at 4:30, and then at either 6:15 or 6:30, I hope that you have gotten your teams together and it is not too late, because we're gonna have trivia night. And it should be lots of fun, and there are fabulous prizes for the winners. The teams will be 4 to 5 folks. So if you don't have a team in mind, just come and we'll connect, and we'll get you a team. So, are we on time?
Yeah, we're good.